Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Tactics Board. The Championship Tuesday, Saturday grind is back. Norwich City have a Carrow Road doubleheader to look forward to this week, and it starts tomorrow night against Leeds United. The Canaries welcome former head coach and legendary figure Daniel Farke back to NR1. But of course, these days, it's all about Johannes Hoff Thorup and his group. They're hoping to build on 3 valuable points against Derby County on Saturday. And here on Tactics Board, we're going to take a look at how the game will pan out. First of all, I'll take you through my predicted 11 for the game. Then we'll take a look at Leeds and how they might affect things. And then a tactical element, which this week is going to be how Hoffball is slightly different to Farkeball, because I'm sure we've all seen those comparisons. But without further ado, we're going to start with that 11. And here's what I think Thorup will choose for the game. So I've gone for Angus Gunn in goal, Kellen Fisher at right back, Shane Duffy and Jose Cordoba in the centre of defence, with Callum Doyle at left back, Kenny McLean, Marcelino Nunez and Anis Ben Slimane in the centre of midfield. Ante Cianat's on the right, Borja Sainz on the left, and Josh Sargent through the middle up front. You can tell things are going well when there's only really 1 or 2 areas in the team that you feel warrant discussion. I'm going to head straight for that midfield because for me, that's the only position Thorup is really likely to change, barring any sort of late injuries or fitness concerns, of course. We wondered if Slimane would come in for Oscar Schwartau for the Derby game. I think Thorup erred on the side of continuity because of how good Norwich were against Watford, but you could see the benefits that Slimane brought when he made that cameo in the second half. It did feel, to be honest, like Norwich were a little bit stronger in the midfield. And although Schwartau continues to show positive signs, and at 18, he looks like somebody who really could go and play at a very high level indeed, it wasn't his best performance at the weekend, and it did feel like Norwich were a little bit exposed to that Derby midfield and they did struggle to get through it at times. But Slimane gives them a bit more strength in there, a bit more directness you feel, and maybe a little bit more involvement than Schwartau, whose work tends to be off the ball. And don't get me wrong, you definitely need players like that, but at times Norwich need somebody who is able to impact things more on the ball, to dribble a little bit and to gain possession, make the game about themselves a little bit, and you don't feel Schwartau right now is really playing that role. I think he will be a tactical option for Norwich throughout the season, and we'll probably see these two rotate depending on the opposition. But you feel, given the strength that Leeds will provide and the quality of the opposition there, a bit more of a fighter and somebody who will have a bit more involvement in the game in Slimane, I think would be a positive for Norwich. And you saw that, of course, with the third goal, a fantastic pass over for Josh Sargent to then set up Sainz for his hat-trick. And I think everyone who saw, first of all, that performance against Coventry and then that performance against Derby would say that if Slimane's fit, he will give Norwich a good amount there. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Thorup make that change, especially with the quick turnover from the 2 games. There is an argument for continuity, and of course, Norwich were doing pretty well when Slimane came on, but I just think the argument for him being back in the team is getting quite strong now, and it's only a matter of time for me before we see him make his first Norwich start. Now to come on to Leeds and some of the strengths and weaknesses that they've got. I think most people are aware of the quality of that squad. Daniel Farke has a number of very, very good players to work with, and although everyone who saw his team in Norfolk would know that he is a system-based manager and he is someone who has that philosophical vision of how things should play out tactically, that Leeds system is based a bit more on sort of individual quality and getting those one-on-one situations than it was at Norwich. Of course, he did have that individual quality. He had the likes of Teemu Pukki and Emi Buendia and Todd Cantwell when he was at his best, but this Leeds team is a little bit more direct. They benefit from a few more sort of exciting dribblers and wingers who will take fullbacks on and cause you problems in and around your box. And for that reason, I think it's a big game defensively for Kellen Fisher and Callum Doyle. There were positive signs against Derby from Fisher after a couple of tough minutes around the start. He seemed to get the best of that battle with Nathaniel Mendez-Lang, although he was quite a lot bigger than him, maybe benefited from a little bit more pace as well. Fisher's timing was really, really good. He never obviously shirks a challenge. And I think he looked like a very good defensive fullback, along with the sort of in-possession elements that a lot of people have highlighted and that inverted role that he has been asked to play. On the other side, you've got Doyle, whose defensive qualities nobody can doubt, given he's played at centre-back for most of his career. But you do wonder if that pace will be a problem against probably Willie Gnonto on that right-hand side for Leeds, who has been one of the key players in their positive start to the season. Very, very good in that 3-0 win over Coventry at the weekend. And that would be a slight concern, but equally, if Doyle can get his timing right, if he can be in the right positions before Gnonto receives the ball, then there's no reason why he can't win that battle and he can't get the best of Gnonto. And that, I suppose, is the benefit, or another benefit, to having him out there. We all know the quality that he's got on the ball, and maybe he isn't likely to be racing around the outside of Borja Sainz and whipping crosses in too often, but defensively he gives you that solidity, and although the pace might be a bit of a problem, if they can get him in a situation where he's not defending loads of space, which is arguably a little bit easier with Jose Cordoba on that left-hand side of the defence as well, then that should make things slightly easier for Doyle. So with Cordoba at left centre-back, his strengths sort of come out at left-back, Doyle, and although he probably is still better suited to that centre-back role, you can see why those two as a pairing on that side of the defence work quite well, and they could be quite key in nullifying Leeds' strengths if possible. But of course, we all know that you can't always contain that level of quality, and it will be about exploiting things at the other end for Norwich, and that's where some of the weakness comes in for Leeds. First of all, set pieces, as has historically been an issue for Farke. It was at Norwich, and it was actually when he came to Carrow Road for the first time since leaving back in, I think it was autumn last year, when Shane Duffy scored one goal from a corner, could have had another if it wasn't ruled out, and Norwich did look a real threat from set pieces. So maybe they can score their first goal from a set piece this midweek, and they'll hope to be able to do that against a team that is probably quite vulnerable to them. The other area that Norwich will look to exploit will be central areas. We know that Leeds play with quite a high number 10, often that's Joel Pirro, who actually has operated as a striker for most of his career. Sometimes it's Aronson, but either way, they tend to play quite high up the pitch. That leaves the two deep-lying midfielders against Norwich's three, and then the inverted fullbacks who will be coming inside as well. So if Norwich can make the most of that numerical superiority, as they did very, very well against Watford's two in midfield, then that might be where they get some joy trying to create chances coming through the middle of the pitch. But equally, the inverted fullback role does present a challenge. When we talk about that individual quality out wide that I referenced, there is going to be an onus on Doyle and Fisher to, once they've inverted and then Norwich have lost the ball, go and get back and cover that area very, very quickly. I thought they were exposed a little bit at times against Derby, who didn't often have the quality to exploit that, but there was space out wide if they won the ball quickly and got the ball wide out quickly. Now, if Leeds are able to do that, then that could be a problem for Norwich. But equally, I'm sure Thorup will back Fisher and Doyle, having had time to learn that role a little bit, to know their timings, to get back into the wide areas when possible. And that will be the aim for them, is balancing that in possession strength with the inverted fullbacks, to then out of possession having the numbers to cover those wide areas when Leeds are getting their best players on the ball out there. The other area I wanted to touch on, and this is the final thing, is sort of the cutbacks. And I mentioned that high number 10 and the fact that the wingers like to get to the byline to cause problems. That means that there will be players like Pirro, like Aronson, trying to run from areas late and get into the box and box crash, as was the term we discussed last week when we talked about Norwich's midfielders scoring more goals. And that means that the likes of Kenny McLean, the centre-backs obviously, will have to be very alert, because if those cutbacks are coming in, if Angus Gunn is pushing a few out, then it's the responsibility of the defenders to get there before the late arriving Leeds midfielders get there. And that could well be a problem for them. But equally, they've got Kenny McLean in there who tends to be quite switched on. Didn't have his best game, I thought, against Derby, but given he has played in that Farke system, I'm sure that's something he knows he'll have to be aware of, and it will be an interesting battle in and around that area when Leeds are trying to get all of those cutbacks in and cause those problems from wide areas. To finish with, we're just going to discuss a couple of the differences between Hoffball and Farkeball. I think it's an interesting discussion because inevitably there were always going to be comparisons. You get foreign head coaches coming in for Norwich. Thorup just their third, Farke was actually their first. They both want this possession-based style. They were both quite young when they arrived at the club. Neither had managed in England before, and you can understand why there were these comparisons. But there are some not so subtle differences, I suppose, between the two head coaches, and I think we'll be able to notice them tomorrow night. One of them is pressing, which Farke wasn't really as committed to or anywhere near as committed to be honest, as Thorup is. He did love that possession-based football. He'd love to have the ball, but mainly that was about making sure the opposition never really got on it, and that being the priority. Thorup does like to think about having possession and attacking and how you use the ball best, but then equally it's about, if you lose it, winning it back as quickly as possible so that you have more of the ball, and also in the most dangerous areas possible so that you can create chances by pressing high up the pitch. That's one of the major differences when you look at maybe how Teemu Pukki and Emi Buendia and Marco Stiepermann might have pressed. Yes, there was that aggression when they were close to the ball, but they weren't desperate to get really high up the pitch and win the ball back as quickly as possible. They were more focused on having the ball. So that's one of the major differences. The other one is the inverted fullbacks, which obviously I discussed a little bit earlier, and that is almost the opposite to what Farke used to use. It was one of the rare similarities between Wagner's football and Farke's football was that they both liked their fullbacks high and wide. At Norwich's best under Farke, I think it was Jamal Lewis on one side and Max Aarons on the other, when they would both be very high up the pitch. They were both capable in possession, and they were both making those cutbacks that I spoke about. Those cutbacks are a big part of Farke's football, and they were continually a threat. That was how he liked to use his fullbacks, whereas Thorup likes to use his fullbacks to create that numerical superiority in midfield. As I mentioned, we've seen it work very well against Watford. I'm sure he'll hope that it works pretty well against Leeds as well, but that is another major difference. And there are also some subtle things that maybe Thorup changes from game to game that Farke wouldn't change. Defensively, from set pieces, they also look to be a little bit stronger as well. After some struggles in pre-season, Norwich haven't conceded from one yet. So a few changes there. I think everyone can see the similarities in terms of loving to have the ball and wanting to play those short passes and progress the ball through the pitch on the floor. But you can achieve that same objective in very different ways. And I think that's what we've seen from these two head coaches. It will be an interesting battle tomorrow night. Of course, we'll have all the coverage you need across our channels. So go to pinkun.com/subscribe and you won't miss any of it. Thank you very much for joining me on Tactics Board. I'm sure I'll see some of you at Carrow Road tomorrow evening, and I'll see many of you ahead of the Hull game when we'll be recording another Tactics Board episode. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you very soon.